Today we'll continue with our previous lesson. So previously we talked about, or our lesson is all about the World Wide Web, and this time we're going to continue discussing it. So if you can remember, last time we've only discussed the overview on how the web works, and today, this afternoon, we are going to continue discussing it, or we're going to discuss how the web works in much more detail. So again, my name is Julius, your instructor. Please be sure to listen attentively right after this class. We'll be having an assessment activity and I'm going to upload an assignment. So try to keep up or try to take note. And if you have any questions or clarifications regarding today's lesson, please go ahead and comment your questions in our Facebook group post, or you can send it in through our Facebook chat group, just in case if there are any questions. Or later on, I'm going to allow you to raise your questions by the end of this class. So previously we've discussed about, again, the World Wide Web, particularly the Internet and the World Wide Web, classification of websites, and an overview on how the web works. So this time we're going to discuss the full details on how the web works. Okay, but before we do so, allow me first to we'll have a review on whether or not we are ready for the next lesson. We're going to review our assessment activity last time. So hold on. Okay, so again, we're going to check your work with our assessment activity, and this is to check whether or not we are ready for our next lesson. Okay, so the first one, it is the term used to refer to a network of millions of computers around the globe that is used to transmit data. What's the answer?
Internet.
Internet, sir.
Internet,
Internet,
sir.
sir.
Okay, internet. Okay, so basically, if there are two computers that are connected together, then we already have a computer network. But if we're going to add millions of computers more, then we have internet. So these computers are connected together that are used to transmit data, that is the internet. And a way of transmitting data over the internet is called second. What's the answer? A way of transmitting data over the internet.
World. World Wide Web.
Okay, that's right. That's right. All right. So the World Wide Web is one of those ways on the computers in the internet can transmit data altogether. And then we have collection of web pages. Okay, that's supposed to be web pages. I'm hoping what mo naglibog ani. It's collection of web pages that constitutes the World Wide Web.
Websites.
Okay, websites. All right, so basically
Websites.
that is the main goal. That's the main purpose of the World Wide Web, right? Is for for us to visit, for us to use websites, diba? For us to be able to visit from website to another using the World Wide Web. And then here, the World Wide Web transmit data over the internet through the use of
HTTP, website, and hypertext markup language.
that's correct. All right, so basically the transmission of
Transmission
data
of data
using the World Wide
using the
Web.
World Wide Web.
Isa,
Isa.
pakimute. Okay, thank you. All right, or through the use of the Hypertext Transfer Protocol or HTTP and Hypertext Markup Language or HTML. So basically, Hypertext Transfer Protocol or HTTP will be initiated the moment that we enter the URL. Diba? If, for example, if we're going to visit a website, let's say facebook.com, so the moment that we enter facebook.com, then an HTTP or Hypertext Transfer Protocol request will be initiated. So we'll talk more about it in just a few moments. Basically, the Hypertext Transfer Protocol is responsible for sending and receiving web contents. Okay, and then the Hypertext Markup Language is basically the 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 result of the HTTP request. So the moment that an HTTP request will be made, the browser will expect a hypertext markup language web content to be returned. Okay, and then it contains non-interactive, and fixed contents. This classification of website is mostly developed using only HTML and CSS. Salan.
Static websites.
Okay, static websites. All right. So when we say static website, these are the website that doesn't have any other functionalities other than just viewing and reading it. So it is non-interactive and it's got fixed contents, and usually they are made using HTML and CSS. And then below are the disadvantages of a dynamic website. Anyone?
Expensive.
Disadvantage of dynamic website. Yeah, expensive. Why do you think that is expensive? Ano expensive gani ang dynamic websites?
Okay, man ka sir, mag-update.
Okay, first of all, the reason why it's expensive, it's because if ikaw dili ta kabalo nga mo code, if you don't know how to, if you're not really web developer, we don't have any expertise with web development, let's say using or programming kumbaga, then we'll have to hire somebody that can, diba? So that is already an expense. And then hosting it, diba? If ganantang i-deploy siya sa World Wide Web, we'll have to pay for its functionalities. For example, if it's got email services, we'll have to pay for the email services. If it has database servers, then we'll have to pay extra for the database server. So that's why it is expensive. And another thing, sa pilain, disadvantage of a dynamic website. It is slow processing, diba? Why do you think dynamic websites kani slow processing man siya? Anybody? Can anybody give an idea why dynamic websites tend to be slow on processing?
Kay update mo siya tanan sir. Nag-change po siya kag niya naganahan si mo po siya long time server.
Mm-hmm. Anybody? Okay, anybody else? Why is it that dynamic websites tend to be slow on processing?
The longer your code or programming, the more loading it costs, sir.
Okay, all right. Okay, that's correct. So not just about the length or the the size of the codes, but yeah, the code itself, regardless of how long it will, how big your code is. Sometimes there are some web servers that will require that it's very slow on processing those scripts because later on we'll discuss it. But some of the programming languages or web development languages, di ba, kinahanglan siyang i-translate into HTML because our browser can only read HTML. So there might be some cases that some web servers will take a lot of time to translate those programming languages into HTML. So aside from the scripts na database, the database will have to be translated first. The database records, instead, for example, SQL, it will be translated to HTML. So that's why sometimes it will take for a little while for it to load. Okay, and then we have below are the advantages of a static website. Advantages of static websites, rather. So,
Easier to develop.
easier to develop.
Cheap to develop.
Easy to update. Cheap to host.
Cheap to host, sir.
Okay, all right, let's check the answers. It says here that the answer is easier to develop, cheap to develop, and cheap to host. Okay, so when we say easier to develop, that is because kita, especially if we have very little knowledge regarding web development, so long as kabalutang mo HTML or CSS, we ourselves can develop static websites. We don't have to pay for anybody who can do dynamic websites, diba? And then it says here cheap to develop because again, since if we can do it ourselves, we no longer have to pay for somebody to do it for us. And then cheap to host. Okay, so mostly static websites are cheaper to host. It's because there are no other functionalities, there are no other extra services required. Diba? Unlike dynamic websites that will perhaps butangan nato og database, pwede nato butangan nato og email services. Okay? So that's why it is more expensive to host compared to static websites. No problem with static websites because we're no longer be needing any of those. And then it is a hierarchical naming system for network devices. It serves as a phone book of the internet.
Domain name system.
DNS.
Domain name system, sir.
Okay, so basically the domain name system server or DNS server serves as the phone book of the internet. So think about this, that every time that a website will be hosted, kanang deploying a website ba, it will be uh, it will be assigned with a unique IP address. And since it is very impractical for us to memorize IP addresses as human, diba? So that's why the DNS server is basically giimbento siya so that all the IP addresses will be saved in the DNS server so that us human will no longer have to memorize DNS server. Just like nganong na iPhone book for us not to memorize the phone numbers of the people that nga ganahan natong tawagan. So for us not to memorize maybe hundreds of phone numbers, phone book is invented. And then true or false, the processes of how the web works can be summarized into a series of interaction between clients, servers, and DNS server.
True, sir.
Okay. And then
Yes,
lastly,
sir.
true or false, the web content are translated into HTML form before the server sends it back to the client. True or false? Web servers daw, i-translate niyang web contents to HTML form before it will be sent back to the client. Is it true? False?
True, sir.
True. Okay.
True, sir.
Why? Why is that so? Ano man? Anong kinahanglan niya translate into HTML form? Anyone? Why is it that web server has to translate web contents into HTML form before it will be sent back to the client or to the browser?
Sir, check sir, og naa ba siya anang kuan sir o wala ba dili ba siya ma-error sir?
What else? Anyone? Okay, if you can remember last time, we've discussed that our browsers can only read HTML and CSS. Okay, so our browser cannot read any other scripting languages, but HTML, CSS, and any other client-side scripts. So that's why web servers have to translate all the web contents into HTML form before it will be sent back to our browser. And it says here that the average is 11.56. That means most of you have passed the assessment. That means we are ready for our next lesson. So if you're ready, today we'll be talking about the second part of the World Wide Web, and we're going to discuss in full details on how the web works. And basically, it's interaction between the three systems. We have the web browsers, domain name system or DNS servers, and web servers. So we're going to learn how the web works in much more detail. So just a review, this is what we've discussed last time. So every time that we'll be visiting a website, okay, using our browser, an HTTP request will be made. Okay, so for example, if we're going to visit a website, let's say norsu.edu.ph or facebook.com na lang para mas relatable sa tanan, the facebook.com or the HTTP request will check in the DNS server to get the IP address for facebook.com. And then once the IP address is found, the IP address will be used to locate the host web server. And then the web server will collect the web contents, translate them into HTML form, and send it back to the client in an HTML form. And all of these are through the use of the internet. Okay, all of these processes is through the use of internet. Hold on, someone's sending a message. Okay, anyway. Okay, so again, going back, so if we're going to visit a website, let's say norsu.edu.ph, the HTTP request will go to the DNS server to get the IP address. And once the IP address is found, it will be used to locate the host web server. And then once the server receives the request, it will process it, collects the web contents, and then send it back to the client in an HTML form. And then the client will render those HTML form in HTML files instead of codes. It will render the graphics on the screen. The web browser's rendering capability limits to HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and other client-side scripts only. However, it cannot render server-side scripts like PHP. So for example, one of the server-side scripts or programming web development languages is PHP, and the web server has to translate any other server-side scripts like PHP into HTML before it will be sent back to the client, because again, web browser's rendering capability limits only to HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and other client-side scripts. Okay? So let's talk about the web browsers. Clients are the devices and software that request and render web contents. This includes web browsers, online games, music and video streaming applications, online shopping applications, and many more. And one of a very good example of a client is browser. A web browser is a software application for accessing web contents on the World Wide Web. According to wikipedia.org, Google Chrome is the most used web browser with a 64% global market share on all devices, followed by Safari, Mozilla Firefox, and Microsoft Edge. Okay, so again, according to wikipedia.org, Google Chrome is the most used web browser. That's why I ask you to download Google Chrome, and that's going to be the web browser that we'll be using all throughout our web development course. So basically, this is Google Chrome. So this is an example of browser. Everybody has seen it, everybody has used it, and everybody likes it. Okay, and I guess no one here doesn't know about Google Chrome. Tanan siguro ta nakabalo, regardless if you're IT or not, you already know what Google Chrome is. It is one of the most used browser, for at least for us, and one very important thing about Google Chrome, because it's got one of the features is can pag-click nimo nga three buttons right there, it's got incognito mode, and you can do whatever it is that you want to do after that. And okay, di ba? All right, so we have browsers use Hypertext Transfer Protocol or HTTP in communicating the web servers and requesting web contents. So again, going back to our overview discussion, every time that we'll be doing or every time that we're going to visit a website, an HTTP request is initiated by the browser. So again, the HTTP is responsible for getting the IP address from the DNS server. The HTTP is also responsible for locating the web server, and the HTTP request is responsible for receiving the web contents. Diba? So basically, every time that we'll be visiting a website, an HTTP will be initiated, and the HTTP will take care of everything for us. So it's like kanang mura siya middleman. If we want to buy something, we can go to a broker company, and then they'll be the one who's going to do everything for us. We just have to pay for it. Okay, so that's the same thing with the browser. The HTTP is like the broker of the browsers. They are the ones who are going to initiate all the activities that we'll be doing every time that we are going to visit any website. So once the browser receives the web content, it uses its rendering engine to render the web contents like the HTML files, JavaScript images, videos, and any other supported files on the screen. So remember that whenever the browser sends the web content back to the client, it needs to be translated into HTML, because apparently that's the only thing that the browsers can read. So again, JavaScript images, videos, and any other supported files will be translated into HTML, except JavaScript. We'll talk more about it. And then the rendering engine is going to translate those codes into actual graphics. Diba? Kumbaga, it's all graphics in the web server, but for it to be transferred to the client, it needs to be translated into HTML. But for us to see it in our screen, it needs to be translated back to actual graphics para makita nato ang graphics sa atong screen. Okay, so basically it's just being translated into HTML form on the way to the client. So basically that is how the web content is processed using the hypertext transfer protocol. Now, for a browser to work, di ba? For us to be able to use the browser and for the browser to work properly and according to what they are supposed to, browsers are usually made up of different components that make it all work. Okay, so we have browsers user interface or UI, internal engine, rendering engine, networking components, data storage, and a JavaScript interpreter. So basically, the browser, although sa siya kabuok, there are five components that works together that basically that makes all the functionalities working. Okay, so again, we have browser user interface or browser UI, internal engine, rendering engine, networking components, data storage, and JavaScript interpreter. And let's try to explain it one by one. Let's start with the browser user interface. So the browser user interface is the overall appearance of the web browser. From the term suggests, user interface. This is where we interact with the browser. It contains the tools, navigations, and controls and how the browser is being used. These includes the address bar, navigation buttons, menu bar, bookmark tabs, and more. Okay, so basically everything that we see on our browser is the browser user interface. So this is an example of browser. Again, everybody uses this one. Everybody know about Google Chrome, and basically this is the user interface of a Google Chrome. What do we see here? Unsa atong makita sa Chrome?
Search bar.
Okay, we have the search bar or the URL bar. Okay, bookmarks. Unsa pa?
By other
Apps engine bar.
Asa na engine bar ani? Okay, so we have here the controls. We have back, forward, reload. We have home, diba?
favorite.
We have the tabs. We have here the bookmarks. We have here the extensions. We have here kanang sa login some sa sessions, and we have here the entire screen. Let's not forget the entire screen. It is part of the user interface. Basically, this is where all the contents that we're trying to view can be viewed. All right, and then any other controls. So basically, this is the user interface. It allows the interaction between you or between us, the user, and the browser itself. So it allows us to send a command to the rendering engine or the internal engine to whatever it is that we wanted to do. Diba? So for example, if I am currently in google.com, if I want to go back, I just have to click this icon and it will allow me to go back to the previous page that I visited. Diba? Mo man ay purpose ana. And then if I want to go back, if I want to reload a page, I just have to click this icon and it will reload the entire page. It will refresh the screen. If I want to go back to my home page, I'm just going to click this. It will allow me to go to the home page, save in my browser. Diba? And if I want to go to any of my bookmarks, I just have to click any of these bookmarks and it will allow me to visit that particular bookmark. So for example, if I wanted to go, let's say Gmail, diba? So right now I've saved it as a bookmark, and that way it'll be easy for me to visit. So these are the applications or the websites that I usually use. So I just have to click any of these and it will automatically route me to there. So for example, if I want to go to Gmail, I just have to click that. Then I'll be in Gmail in no time. But I don't have to type in gmail.com or something like that. So that is the browser user interface. Basically, it allows the control. It allows the navigation. Basically, it allows the interaction between the user and the browser. And then next is we have the internal engine. Internal engine processes any commands made in the browser user interface. For example, the user clicked the back button of the browser. The internal engine will then process the request by checking the browser history, get the URL of the previous page so that it can be reloaded. Okay, so basically the internal engine is like the brain of the web browser, the functionalities of the browser user interface. So going back, diba? So this is our muna nga to ang user interface, browser user interface. We have the back, reload, so on and so forth. We have the controls, the screen. So basically, the the internal engine is responsible for making or responsible for the functionalities of the user interface. So for example, right now I'm currently in google.com. If I want to go back, okay, if I want to go back, I just have to click back, and then the browser will get the internal engine will get the uh, page. I'm sorry, the URL of the previous page that I visited, so that it can be loaded on the screen. So right, gaina na ako sa Gmail. Right now, I'm currently on YouTube. Now, if I want to go back to Gmail, then I just have to click the forward icon, and it will send me back to my previous page. All right. So basically, every functionalities of this UI is because of or is responsible by is a responsibility of the internal engine. Basically, it is like the brain of the browser. So everything that we're going to do in our browser, the internal engine will catch those and will perform it for you. Then we have the rendering engine. It is responsible for translating HTML and CSS and rendering the content on the screen. So, going back sa atong example gaina, every time that a every time that a koan every time that the web server will send a web content back to our screen, it will first render it to HTML, diba? It translates on yung HTML so that our browser will read it. However, it would be bad for us if we're going to see this. Way angay if dili useless siya kung atong madawat is code kani. So mo ni ang code nga gihatag gikan sa atong web server, it is converted into HTML. Now, it's not going to be very useful. The browser is not going to be useful, or the web content is not useful if we are seeing this on the screen, di ba? Dili ta ma-enjoy sa atong internet, sa atong World Wide Web, kung inani makita nato every time. So, the rendering engine will render these codes, kani nga mga codes. So, basically, mao ni ang HTML file nga gisend gikan sa web browser, web server. The rendering engine will render these codes so that we will see this instead of this. Okay? So for example, kaninga picture, kaninga meme. So maybe na usa siya dire mga codes. Code ra siya dire, but then because of the rendering engine, it is being translated to something like this. All right? Nagets ra ba?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So for the rendering engines, there are different rendering engines according to the browser that you're using. So we have Trident, Gecko, Opera, WebKit, and Blink. So for Trident is used by Microsoft Internet Explorer and the Windows mobile browser. Gecko, it is used by Mozilla Firefox, Firefox OS browser. And then Opera, na rendering engine, it is used by Opera Mini, Opera Mobile, and other older Opera browser versions. And then WebKit is used by Apple Safari and old Android browsers. And Blink is used by Google Chrome, newer Opera browsers, and Android browser versions. Okay, so basically each browser has, di ba na siya yung kaugalingong rendering engine, and each browser has their own rendering engine. So why do you think nganong lahi-lahi man ang engines kada browser if they usually does the same thing? Any idea? Anong lahi-lahi man? Okay. For us to understand why is it that there are different rendering engines, we'll have to go back to the history of browsers. So once upon a time, okay, once upon a time in 1990s, during the rise of popularity of the World Wide Web, web browser companies used to compete with each other by offering features and functionalities that other web browsers doesn't have. Okay? So, ang mga browsers sa unang panahon, nag-iya-iya sila og nag-iya-iya sila og kuan ba kana bang release og mga features nga wala sa uban nga browser And basically, it offers functionalities that other browsers doesn't have. So basically, they have in that way. Because of that, nas like galingon nga rendering engine. Because this rendering engine, for example, Microsoft Internet Explorer, their engine is capable of um, displaying like kanang mga animations, and ang uban wala. Wala every time that each browser company will release features nga wala sa uban nga company, in that way more because they want to gain more users ba. So ilahang marketing strategy is they are going to release features that other browsers doesn't offer. In that way, they will gain users more. Okay, so that was the browser wars in 1990. So it became a chain of reaction, di ba? If mo release ron ang Microsoft, na mo release pud ang lain nga company og ilaha nga feature nga wala sa Microsoft, something like that. So what happened is that ang naitabo is it is very hard for the web developers and the viewers because for the viewers matingala sila nga nung lahi ang hitsura sa website ani nga browser. For example, let's say Microsoft Internet Explorer, lahi ang hitsura sa website sa Internet Explorer, lahi pod ang hitsura sa Chrome, lahi ang hitsura sa Firefox. That is because of the browser war. Each browser company offers different features than the other. Okay? Now, because of that, the World Wide Web Consortium, or the W3C, by the way, is the main international standards organization for the World Wide Web. They introduced the web standards, a set of standardized best practices and protocols for building websites. This helped ending the browser war. Diba? Aside from the viewers nga lahi-lahi ang itsura sa ilang website nga i-visit depending on the browser that they are using, so it raises confusion, di ba? Kaya isa lahi imong website, hisura sa imong website, ani nga browser, lahi po ang itsura kung lahi imong browser gamiton. So, it's confusing. And it was much more confusing to the web developer, katong mga web designer. Because this time, for their website to be magamit siya sa mga user, they have to design the website for Chrome, they have to design the website for Internet Explorer, they have to design the website for any other web browser. So, imbis nga usaray lang trabaho, daghan na nun yung trabaho because they have to design the website sa tanan nga mga browser that time. So, it's very hassle, it raises lots of confusion, and it was very hard, it was very confusing for the user and the programmer or the developer. So, the World Wide Web Consortium was founded. That is to control, basically they introduced the web standard, a set of standardized best practice and protocols for building websites. So because of the web standards, ang mga web browser, di na sila dapat mo release of mga new features na wala sa uban nga browser. So every time that they're going to release feature, it must be that all the other web browser company can also do the same thing. Alright? So it ended the browser war. So that is basically the reason why we have different rendering engine. But even though we have different rendering engines, so tendency is na mga difference na ay mga lahi ang itsura niya diri nga website, lahi ang ani nga browser, lahi pud ang itsura sa lain nga browser. But because of the W3C, it's no longer a thing. That is no longer di na siya mao. It's because of the W3C, they control the web browser, and to make sure that all the websites or the websites will display just the same regardless of the browser that you are using. All right. And then the next networking component is the next component for a browser is the networking components. These are responsible for sending and receiving HTTP requests. HTTP is a protocol that is used for sending and receiving web contents. Diba? Going back, every time that we're going to visit a website, basically an HTTP request will be initiated, and the HTTP is responsible for sending the request, for getting the IP address, for locating the web server, and receiving the web contents. So, the networking components of a browser is the one responsible for initiating the HTTP request. Okay? So by the way, before we proceed, have you experienced it? Nakatry ba mo nga any website at all, medyo lahi ang itsura niya sa Chrome, lahi po ang itsura niya sa other websites. Naka-experience mo na?
Yes, sir.
Unsa
Yes,
may
sir.
unsa man? Can you share unsay mga unsay scenario?
Opera, opera
Lahi-lahi
browser,
siya
sir.
design, sir.
Ha? Unsa to misconception? Unsa to?
Lahi-lahi siya design, sir, sa kuan, sa bookmark, sir ba? Lahi siya.
Okay. All right. So some other cases, maybe dili malikayan nga sometimes the websites may look different on a different web browser, di ba? Although the W3C or the World Wide Web Consortium is trying to stop that, they are making sure that each website will function just the same with any other web browser. But there might be some cases nga lahi gyud, okay? That's why when designing a website, later on we will get to that in our future lessons. But when we are designing a website, there might be some case that we have to be specific. If it's gonna be for we're going to design it for Trident, Gecko, Opera, WebKit, or Blink. But most of the time, all of the functionalities will work all of these rendering engine, but there might be some instances that we will have to be specific with regards to which rendering engines we are going to design it for. Anyway, we're going to do that in our future lesson with the CSS. Okay, and then we have data storage. Data storage is responsible for session management and storing web cache and cookies. Cache is a temporary storage for any parts of the web content. Cookies are small pieces of data, usually text files that the server sends to the browser. Okay, so kinsa nakabantay og cache and cookies whenever you try to visit a website? Anyone? Nakatrain mo ana before? Nakabantay mo ana?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So some of the websites, especially if this is the first time that we visited them, it will give us an option or it will just inform us that the website will use cookies, diba? Or it uses cache. Nana. So basically, it is about data storage. So let's start with the cache. Let's start with the cache. Okay, again, it is a temporary storage for any parts of a web content. So to explain this, perhaps practically, anyone of everybody, diba? Kita namatay Facebook. Do we all have Facebook applications on our phones?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. So
FB Live.
have you noticed that even if your mobile data or Wi-Fi is turned off, diba? Bisag naka-off ang imong mobile data, naka-off ang imong Wi-Fi, but every time that we open up Facebook, nagyapon tong mga contents that we've seen previously. Na ang mga pictures sa imong friend, na atong mga pictures nga imong gilike, inana ba? Even though your mobile data or Wi-Fi is turned off. Kabante mo na?
Yes, sir. Bisan video, sir.
Like mo play gyapon ang video bisag naka-off imong mobile data.
Yes, sir. Play Japon siya.
Okay, so that is because of the cache. Basically, the cache is, or Facebook uses cache to save those files temporarily on your mobile device. Diba? So every time that you're going to, for example, mag-open ko Facebook, I'm not sure if you'll see this, kana, okay? Mag-open ko Facebook, right now, since I'm connected to internet, right now, every time that I'm going to scroll down, it will load more contents, di ba? Mo load siya more contents, and those contents, dili siya ma-delete. It will be saved temporarily in my Facebook app. Ma-save siya temporarily sa akong phone. So the moment that I'm going to open my Facebook application again, regardless if my mobile data is turned on or Wi-Fi is turned on, it will still be there. That is because it is already been cached. Gisave siya as temporarily sa akong device. So that's why makabantay mo nga makadugayin mo gamit sa Facebook, magkahang inyong imong cellphone if you have gamay na lang kaya inyong storage. So how are you going to remove this cache? Mga unsa yung pagtangtang sa cache? Kabalo mo unsaon?
Clear data.
Okay, clear data. All right. So you're going to go to your settings. Okay, settings and then application management and then look for Facebook app. Okay, I'm not sure if makita niyo. Go to Facebook and then clear data or clear cache. Okay, so what it does is it's going to remove it. It will delete all those temporary files saved on your mobile device on the application. Okay, in that way, mas ma-fill up, ma-free up ang inyong storage. Okay, but what it does is every time that you're going to open the kung i-open na nimo ang Facebook again, it will be empty. So it's like you're starting from the very beginning. So you'll have to log in. Yeah, you have to log in again, and then all of the contents that you will see are new contents. Gikan siya, gi-download na po siya gikan sa server. And the moment that you close it, katong mga newly downloaded nga mga contents will be cached again. It will be saved temporarily on your device once again. So these are cached. Same thing with browser, it also does the same thing. Sometimes whenever we try to visit the website, niload na, bisag wala internet. Or kung mo back, bisag dili ko for example, wala ko internet, pero if i-back na ako, mo-load tong previous nga page nga akong gi-visit, that is because of the cache. Alright? However, cookies. Cookies are small pieces of data, usually text files, that are the server sends to the browser. Have you seen this kaning cookies pod before? Have you seen that? Have you seen this type of
Yes, sir.
pop-ups whenever we try to visit a website? It will give us an option to either accept cookies or it will just inform us that the website uses cookies. Okay? So, cookies, murag karon ting pamainit ra ba ron? Right? The first time I've heard it, I'm not really sure what that means because cookies, diba? If we're going to think about it, is something that we eat, right? However, in web browser, it is text files, temporary files. It's still temporary files, but in a form of text files. So, for example, you're going to visit a website and it shows an option for you to download or accept cookies or inform us that the website uses cookies. Every time that you accept this, you are allowing the website to download cookies. That means the text files, every time that you'll type something, diba? Mo type ka og something, it will be saved. Those data, those text nga imong gitype will be saved on your browser. Okay? So what does it mean? So for example, you're going to visit a website that will allow you to enter first name and last name. Unsa man, like Facebook, mo sign up ka Facebook, right? If this is the first time that you've signed up Facebook, let's just say ni fill out ka og NBI clearance. Kinsa nakatry na og koan apply for NBI clearance online?
Wala pa, sir.
Okay. You should try it. All right, so let's just say NBI clearance because that is kuan man kanang kumbaga ako mahuna-hunaan nga website nga mag-import kag name, so on and so forth. So, for example, we are going to fill out for an NBI clearance and we accepted the cookies or the website uses cookies. So, di ba, we'll fill out as first name, di ba? So, every time that we'll fill out the first name, let's say, for example, we type in Steve, right? And then, we type in the last name field, Rogers, di ba? So, the first name, we type in Steve, the last name, we type in Rogers, or any other name, and any other last name that we're going to type in, maybe our name, and then once we save it, di ba? Once we click save, the cookies, those text files will be saved as cookies. So what it does is every time that we're going to open up the same website again, if mo type ta sa first name, nanay mo pop up nga Steve, di ba? Then we can either just click it na lang, di na ta kinahanglan mo type it again. And then same thing with the last name. Nakabante mo ana, so the next time that you open up the same website, nanay mo drop down na suggestion.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
And
sir.
that suggestion was the previous
Yes, sir.
ang imong previous nga input, di ba? Ug unsa imong gi-input last time mo pop up mo drop down po siya. So that is cookies. So whenever the website uses cookies, the text files or every time that you input any text, it will be saved on your browser so that you can use it whenever you wanted to use whenever you fill out the same website again. Okay? So that is cookies. So basically, the data storage is the one responsible for saving the cache and cookies. And another thing here na itong na oversee is session management. What do you mean by session management? Kinsa na idea what are session management? Anyone? Okay. So right now, I am currently logged in Hold on, let me reload this real quick. Okay, right now I'm currently logged in on my Instagram account. Diba? Naka-login ko. So basically, there is already a session. When you say session, that is a login information of, it is a login information on a website. So right now, I'm currently logged in. If I'm going to click that, my profile, okay, kana, magawa sa akong profile, so on and so forth. So basically, a session is already saved on my browser. So if I'm going to close this, if I'm going to close that, and if I'm going to open Instagram again, I will still be kept logged in. Naka-login ra gud gihapon ko. It's because the session is already saved in the browser. Okay? So basically that is session management. Your login information is already saved in the browser. In that way, you don't have to log in again the moment that you close and open the website. So every time that you're going to open the website, so long as you haven't logged out, if wala ka ni log out, then that means you will be kept logged in even if you're going to close the tab or if you're going to close the browser at all, because it is already saved on the data storage of your browser. Ano lang. So that is session management. Anyway, we'll talk more about session management whenever we'll be doing our web development soon. And then, okay, next is we have the JavaScript Interpreter. JavaScript Interpreter is another rendering engine that renders client-side scripts, particularly the JavaScript. Alright, so it's the same with the rendering engine a while ago, but for JavaScript, because since JavaScript is a programming language, since it's a programming language, then the browser has already have a built-in interpreter for JavaScript. So we'll talk more about it later on, but if you don't have an if ganan mo kabalo what are the purpose of JavaScript, so basically these are responsible for, let's say for example, let me open up a Facebook here. Ayan na lang kaya na makita. Okay, let me if I wanted to, let's say, like ganan kong i-heart ni. So if I'm going to wala mo yung option dilain. Okay? Kita mo na yung animation, di ba? Whenever I click this, na siya gamay yung animation. So basically the animation is caused by the JavaScript. So if we're on Facebook, i-hover nato na magawas tong haha, heart, like, na yung mga animation. So basically any interactivity that more on animation, more on dynamics, so that is because of the JavaScript. So that is the muna trabaho sa JavaScript is to make our website a little more interesting. Okay, so do you have any questions so far?
None, sir.
Okay, none. So those are the components of a browser that makes a browser work. So this time we'll talk about the DNS server. This is the second stage, diba? Whenever on the process of the World Wide Web, this is the second stage, getting the IP address from the DNS server. The domain name system or DNS server is a hierarchical naming system for network devices. It serves as a phone book of the internet, but instead of phone numbers, it uses IP or Internet Protocol addresses. When a web server hosts a website, a unique IP address is assigned to be used for locating its content. The IP address will be registered to the DNS server. Since memorizing these IP addresses may take a lot of work for us humans, the DNS server comes to help. Okay, so again, its main purpose is to save the IP address so that humans, like us, will no longer have to memorize it. Okay, so every time that a website will be hosted, that means every time that the website will be deployed for the internet, an unique IP address will be saved in the DNS. Okay, so let's discuss. Here are some of the scenarios as to how the IP address how the DNS server gets the IP address. So let's talk about how the DNS server gets the IP address. So for example, we're going to visit norsu.edu.ph. Diba? The general idea is whenever we search for norsu.edu.ph, the HTTP request will go to the DNS server to get the IP address. Diba? Muna general idea, and then the process continues. The IP address will be used to locate the web host server, etc., etc. Now, scenario. The URL is present in the local ISP DNS server. So this is what it does. So every time that we're going to visit a website, let's say facebook.com, in our case, norsu.edu.ph. So, ang unang buhaton sa HTTP is go to the local ISP DNS server. So, meaning, naa di ay DNS server ang atong mga local ISP. What are ISP? What is ISP? Unsay ISP gani? Anyone?
Internet service provider.
Okay, internet service provider like Globe, PLDT, Smart, so on and so forth, D2, so on and so forth. So our service provider have their own local DNS server. So basically, nag-store po sila og IP addresses for each website. So every time that we're going to visit a website, the first thing that the HTTP will do is to go to the local ISP DNS server to find if if naa ba ang IP address dito. So basically ang atong ang internet service provider nasla ilang kaugalingong phone book sa internet. And then every time that we're going to visit that website, the first thing that the HTTP will do is to visit the ISP to get the DNS server. Okay? And if the local ISP DNS server finds the IP address, then the process continues as the IP address will be used to locate the server, and then the process continues. Okay? However, if you're going to visit a website which is not present in the local ISP DNS server, that means siguro ikaw pa lang ang nakavisit anang website sa inyong lugar. Okay? So, for example, sa Bais, ikaw lang na-visit anang website So, for example, if the URL cannot be found in the local ISP DNS server, then that's the time that it will level up. The HTTP will go to the top level domain. So we have local ISP DNS server. So it will check the IP addresses locally. But if the IP addresses cannot be located in the local ISP DNS server, it will proceed to the top level domain. So basically, that is the biggest DNS and it has access worldwide. So if ang local ISP, local lang, the top level domain have access worldwide. So naagid siya dapat tanan nga mga websites na siya IP address for each of them. So, however, imagine since it's worldwide, there must be millions of websites, di ba? Imagine pila siguro kabuk website ang na-register sa tibok kalibutan. Di ba daghan kaayo? So, to make the process faster, for it to be faster, to get the IP addresses faster, it need to be filtered. Dapat i-filter siya para mas mapadali ang iyahang pag-locate sa IP address. So that is where the root name server and the .com server comes into place. So the root name server and the .com server are still part of the top level domain server. Okay, so part ni siya sa top level domain, root name server and .com server. It is just being used to filter out the URL. In that way, the retrieval of the IP addresses will be much faster. So for example, if we're going to visit norsu.edu.ph and if that website is not located in the local ISP DNS server, then the HTTP will go to the root name server, ato siya sa root name server, to find any website that uses NORSU as the root name. Okay, so again, root norsu.edu.ph, or let's just change it to something that we can all relate. So facebook.com. So from the client, we type in facebook.com. The local ISP DNS server cannot find the IP address for facebook.com. So instead, it will go to the root name server to find any website that has name Facebook in it. So pangitaon niya tanan nga website nga na ay Facebook nga word. Okay? So that is for the root name. So ma-filter out na o kinsa to mga website nga na ay Facebook nga word. Di ba? Because it's filtered. Now, it would be easy once the root name server mapangita na niya tong mga Facebook mga website nga na ay Facebook, then it will be sent to the .com server to find which of the website ang gipangita sa user, sa client. Okay? So basically, the root name server is used to um, filter the website using the root name, di ba? We say facebook.com, Facebook is the root name, and then we have .com server. The .com server contains the IP address. Okay? So again, the root name server filters the website according to the root name, and then the .com server uses the root name server's search result to get the IP address. Okay, nagets lang ba?
Yes, sir.
I know it's a little bit complicated,
Yes, sir.
but that's why we'll try to discuss it as simple as we can. So again, if the local ISP does not dili niya malocate ang imong URL nga gi-visit, the HTTP will proceed to the root name server to filter to the top level domain rather. And first, it will moagisa siya sa root name server to filter the website that has, for example, Facebook in it, and then it will proceed to the .com server to get the actual IP address. Okay. Now, what happened if the URL is not present in both the local ISP DNS server and in the top level domain? So, pag search niyo mo sa website, wala siya sa local ISP DNS server, wala po siya sa top level domain ng ISP server. Ana? So, whenever the IP address cannot be found for both the ISP and the root name server, you will get an error message saying DNS server error or DNS error. Nakatry ba mo nga error? Nakakita na mo na?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Sometimes it will display DNS error, but if the browser is not so sure, it will display address cannot be found. Something like that. All right. So DNS caching helps the retrieval faster by saving the IP address to the local ISP DNS server. That means if you visited the same website within 24 hours, there will be no need to retrieve the IP address to the top level domains again, thus making the loading process faster. So going back to our scenario a while ago, if we visited a website na wala siya sa local ISP pero nakita siya sa top level domain, so the next time that you're going to visit that same website within 24 hours, masave na siya sa local ISP. So every time that mo search kag balik sa website, mas-save na siya sa local ISP, thus increasing the speed of the loading. So that's why makabantay ta, if nakabantay ba mo nga, first time na tong load of website, inay pa siya, but the next time, medyo paspas na siya gamay. It's because the IP address is already saved in the local ISP, that way, dili na siya kinahanglan mo adto sa top level domain. Alright, so that was DNS server, and lastly, let's talk about web servers. So web servers are just any computer installed with specialized applications and components intended for serving web requests. So web hosting is a term referring to posting a website or a web page onto a web server. Okay, so what sa inyong ma-picture out, sa inyong ma-imagine we talk about servers, web servers, sa inyong mahitso, sa inyong ma-picture out ba? Can you share? Anyone? Unsa inyong ma-picture out when you think about web servers? It says here. So go ahead.
Web server is kanang mga computer software gani.
Di ba? Kana ba?
Under
Kana bang ma-imagine ninyo unsa itsura og mga web server ba inana?
ay mga supercomputer ba ganun, sir?
Mga supercomputer. That's the same thing. So, allow me to show you. This is what I've googled. I-google na ako unsa itsura sa sulod sa Facebook server. Kana. So, mao na itsura sa Facebook server daw. So, imagine, and this is just a tip of the pen, di ba? Since excuse me, nainsultong ba? Excuse me, sorry. So anyway, this is just one part of the Facebook's kaning murabag data server. But if we're going to kuan see the aerial view of the Facebook server. Let's see kung sa siya kadako. Okay, so mo ko na itsura sa Facebook. Kani that this was uploaded 2 days ago. So mo ko na ni ang itsura sa Facebook na server and ano siya kadako kani mga buildinga. The reason nga na sigurong dako man siya kaayo. In gibutang dire servers are just any computer man unta. So pwede dire any computer pero nga nang dagko man kaya sa Facebook. Why do you think that is?
Global man ang Facebook, sir. Daghang user gagamit.
Daghang users.
Mga user, sir.
Okay, daghan kang users and imagine each user, for example, in a day. Let's just say there are 2 billion users, Facebook users every day. And then each of these users upload pictures, nag-upload ng mga video, ga-upload og stories, okay? And those stories, those pictures, those videos must be stored somewhere. And it is stored kato ato nga mga buildings ang ipakita ninyo, di ba? But in reality, only because nganong dagko kayo, only because there are billions of users around the globe that is using it simultaneously. So imagine if ang ilang server sa Facebook picture para rag laptop na ako human na 1 second pa lang ni siyok na ako ang laptop. Alright? So but in reality, web servers are just any computer installed with specialized applications and components intended for serving web requests. Okay, so basically any computer, including mine, I'm using a laptop and it's only i3 10th gen, but based on the definition, it can be used as a server. Pwede din siya mahimong server so long as it's installed with specialized applications and components. So what are these specialized applications and components? We're going to discuss it in a moment. And web hosting is a term referring to posting a website or a web page into a web server. So whenever a computer is a web server, di ba? Dihimo na siyang web server. And if I'm going to save a website to it, then that is web hosting, meaning it is ready for to be viewed through the World Wide Web, di ba? Websites are stored in the web server as a series of files and folders, just like saving a file in a computer's local disk. Alright, so basically, a website, ang itsura sa website, moro gyapon day siya og itsura sa mga files nga atong gi-save sa ato ang hard disk. So most of the time, it usually looks like this. So we have, for example, we have here the root, let's say facebook.com, muna itong root, di ba? Facebook.com contains folder for images, for CSS, scripts, so on and so forth. And each of these folders contains files pod. Just like kana mga gina-save nato sa ato ang hard disk or sa atong external nga mga storage devices like USB flash disk and many more. Okay? So basically websites are just like that, and then the contents necessary for the web request will be collected to be sent back to the client. So for example, wadto ko og norsu.com or norsu.edu.ph, and then the home page contains the index, the logo, and some of the scripts. So those files na necessary for the home page will be collected by the web server, translate them into HTML, and send them back to the client. Okay? For dynamic websites, the server processes and translates the application data and database scripts into client-side languages like HTML before it will be sent back to the web browser. So going back to our discussion before, that our browser can only read HTML. So therefore, any web application data, like say PHP, programming language of PHP, or any data, let's say for example SQL, that is for the database, it will be converted first into HTML. Okay? Dapat i-convert siya into HTML before it will be sent back to the client. Nada. And then web servers consist of, okay, so basically that's it. So any other scripts that is not HTML must be converted first with an to HTML before it will be sent back to the client. Now, how do we turn our computers into a web server? Unsa na to ma-convert na to ang atong computer into a web server? So web servers consist of web stacks. Web stacks are groups of software that work together to build and process websites. Web stacks are what make any computer a web server. So the only thing that we're going to do for to convert our computers to a web server is to install a web stack. Okay, so what are web stacks? Web stacks usually consist of operating system, web server, database server, and programming language. So remember that web stacks are groups of software. That means there are more than one software involved in a web stack, diba? And these are operating system, web server, database server, and programming language. Okay, so example of operating system. Kinsay makatag og example of an operating system?
iOS.
Okay, iOS, unsa pa?
Windows.
Mac
Linux.
OS.
Okay, Windows 10, Windows XP, Windows 7, so on and so forth, right? We have Linux. We have mhm,
Android, sir.
Android. Okay, Android. We have Linux. We have Chrome OS. We have we have Mac OS, so on and so forth. Basically, there are tons of operating systems out there. So, the first requirement to turn your computer into a server is to first it needs to have an operating system. So, our computers already have built-in operating system, di ba? So, therefore, check na ta aning dapita, check na ta sa operating system. Next, we have to install a web server. So a web server is an application that processes web requests. So basically, it's the one responsible for receiving HTTP requests and sending HTTP requests, di ba? Mo translate og mo process ba sa mga requests ba every time that a web request will be made. And then a database server. Okay, aside from the operating system, aside from the web server, we need to install a database server. Basically, it is responsible for storing data from the website and process data requests. So, for example, tinan ka nga magamaog ay ang website is maka-login. So, unsaon nimo pag-login? Okay, for you to be able to log in, di ba? Mo sign up sa web page, and then the web page will store your username and your password to the database server. In that way, every time that you log in, i-check lang niya sa database server if naaba ka dito before ka mo login. So, you need to install a database server to make your computer a server. Okay? And then lastly, you'll have to install a programming language. So basically, it translates programming scripts from the website. So, if you can remember, di ba, ang atong browser can only read HTML. So, we need something that will translate any script, let's say PHP or JavaScript, PHP, what's pa man, Ruby or any other programming language. We need something that will translate those programming languages to HTML. Dapat i-translate siya sa HTML, and that's where we need the programming language to be installed. Okay? So, again, the 4 things that we're going to install in our website para magamit nato atong computer para magamit nato siya as a web server is the operating system, web server, database server, and programming language. Okay? However, good thing about right now, dili na ta kinahanglan mo install them manually, individually, because we already have applications that have different usara siya ka application, usara siya ka install, but it will install all of the necessary software needed. So, LAMP is one of the most commonly used web stack that is for the internet using kanang gigamit sa internet ba. So, we're going to skip this. Let's proceed to something that we are all familiar. Have we heard of XAMPP?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I understand that you're using it for your database management system na subject, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, XAMPP is an example of a web stack. So, going back, unsa gayto yung requirement para may mong web stack? We have operating system, web server, database server, and programming language. So, let's check what XAMPP means, or what is inside XAMPP. the moment that we're going to install it. So X stands for cross-platform. Diba? First thing that we need is an operating system. So since XAMPP will be installed to Windows or any other computer, so the computer already have its own operating system, diba? So XAMPP will work. It supports multiple operating systems. So that's why it's X, because it's cross-platform. It can use for Windows, iOS, Mac OS, so on and so forth, diba? So that is for the X. A stands for Apache. Apache is a software. Basically, it is a web server software. So kaning Apache. So A stands for Apache. That is the web server. And then M, wala ko nasulat dire, but it's supposed to be MySQL. Okay. M, my S, kaniduta. QL. All right. So M stands for the MySQL. That is the database server. So basically, that is the one responsible for processing data and storing data to the website. And then P, the first P is for PHP. That is a programming language. And then Perl, which is for another P, that is another programming language supported by XAMPP. All right. So basically, once you install XAMPP on your computer, then your computer is now can be a web server. Right? So na-install na ba ang mga kinsa tong mga computer yan? Naka-install na ba og XAMPP tanan? Okay. So actually for Android phones, na po yung mga web servers, you just have to Google for it. Okay, mo-Google ra mo unsay mga servers na available for Android. I haven't really tried it. Maybe soon I'll check it. I think I have checked it last semester, but nalimot ko unsay ngalan. But napoy server para sa Android. So okay, I guess that will be all for today. So we've just discussed in full details how all the systems work in processing a web content request. So the moment that we enter a URL in our web browser, there are tons of activities that is being done. All right, and then the URL will be used to locate the IP address in the DNS server, and there are also a lot of things that will be done in the DNS server to get the IP address. Same thing with the web server. So do you have any questions, guys, before we end?
Wala na, sir.
Okay.
Wala na,
Anyway,
sir.
just in case if you have any questions or clarifications regarding today's lesson, you can go ahead and send it in our GC. Send you on GC, so everybody else will be able to see it, and then we'll be able to answer. Okay. Anyway, if you don't have any questions, please go ahead. Please follow the link for our assessment for this week. And medyo nasave ko sa deadline here. All right, the deadline would be Tuesday, November 5th. It is 2021. Okay, 2021. And instead of 4 p.m., it's 2 p.m. Nalimot kong, I'm sorry, 1 p.m. rather. 1 p.m. din na. Nalimot ko nga 1 p.m. ditong klase. So again, Tuesday, November 5th, 2021 at 1 p.m. the deadline. The reason why 1 p.m. it's because magklase mata na. So before ta mo klase ato may discuss ang answer. So dapat deadline na. Nobody's going to answer before we discuss the answer. All right, so that will be your assessment. Just follow the link. I'll send it later on. And then for your assignment, I'll upload it on our Google Classroom. But just to give you an idea, here it is. Allow me to show it to you. Open ako na siya na human, but later on, humanon ako ni so that I can upload it on our Google Classroom. So for your assignment, you're going to illustrate how the web works. Choose one from the web activities listed below and discuss the interactions of each system on how it's being done on the World Wide Web. So basically, we've discussed how the web works, diba, sa atong discussion. But that is when we're trying to visit a website. So the same concept applies to any other web activities. So first is isla na ako ning usa na lang kani. Okay. Searching for Nike shoes on Zalora. Ano na lang. Isla na ko ang 3. Sige, medyo mraglisod tong sigay na. So, you're going to select one of these web activities and you're going to discuss the interactions between the 3 systems. Diba? We have the client, the Dns server, and the server, web server. So first is performing an ultimate attack to an enemy hero in Mobile Legends. So what would be the processes involved? The moment that you click the ultimate button, ultimate attack, or kumbaga SS na attack, until such time that you will see it on the screen nga naigo ba imong kontra or la. So you're going to discuss the moment that you click katong button, you're going to go through all the processes involved in the DNS and the web server and going back to your screen, to the client, which is your mobile device. Same thing with playing a movie in Netflix and searching for Nike shoes on Zalora. So, diba? So you're going to discuss the interactions between the 3 systems, and then please include the IP address or location of the web server involved. You can write the processes in a list form or you can illustrate it. Later on, magama kog illustration dire para pwede niyong suiron. Okay? So do you have any questions regarding this?
None so far.
Okay. Just in case na may question, if na may questions, please let me know. It's because, assignment ba niya, basing maglibog mo, please let me know right away. Okay?
Ay, mulantar niya sa illustration niya, sir.
Sige, magaman yung illustration niya. Wait, ha?
Kusay pa sa sir.
Ha? Deadline would be, deadline is, same thing. Deadline would be
1 week.
Nasipyat jugo ani da. Basta kanira gyapon, November 5th, 2020, but this time instead of 1 p.m., 12 midnight na. So pwede mo submit at 12 midnight. So instead of 1 p.m. Wala ko na usab dire, ako ning usban run. Alright. So wala na yung mga questions?
Wala na siguro sir.
Alright. Anyway, just in case if there are any, just let me know. Please turn on your cameras before we end.
Ay, agad.
Sakit ang tutunlan. Gainer ko. Sige, ready? Let's wait for everybody else to turn their camera on. Please turn on. Please turn on.
Uy, ano yung kamera, uy?
Nakuha ng camera, sir. Di makuha ng computer ang camera.
Alright, it's
Black.
okay. Alright, it's okay. Sige, okay, ready? Sige, 3, 2. Gamay na kayo ni turn on, girls. Tinood lang. Lain kayo. Sige, ready? 3, 2, 1, smile. Okay. Alright, thank you so much, guys. I'll see you on our next klase, siguro Tuesday po. Okay?
Sir, sige sir.
Alright, thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir. Bye.
Thank you, sir. Bye.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Well,
Bye. Safe and God bless.
God bless.
Thank you, sir. Bye, sir.
Bye-bye.